Welcome back to part 3 of our fantasy free agency here on the Loaded Box Vids for Dynasty Football. But before we jump in, always got to introduce my good pal Dylan. Dylan, how's it going today, man?
I'm not going to say the same thing as always because I saw you started to smirk. So I'm not going to say the candid. I'm not even going to say it. I'm just going to avoid it. I can't even word it. I'm so used to saying it.
It's okay. I'll say it for you. You know, man, it's really good to be here talking football. It's always a good day when we're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably how I sound. No, it's exciting to talk about potential targets in their real life spots. Granted, some of the guys Mikey and I are going to label today probably won't be very exciting to talk about, but they are considered the top free agents, so we have to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely did a lot of the more well-known guys in the past 2 videos. I mean, looking at the list that we have here today, we do have a handful of guys that are going to stand out. We've got 12 guys on the list today. Admittedly, only 4 or 5 of them are going to have a really, really big impact. But nonetheless, all of these guys could find some sort of fantasy relevancy over the course of the next 6 to 7 months. And we definitely want to make sure that everyone is well aware of them and what is going to potentially happen with them. This is the part where I would say, let's get loaded and I'd crack a beer, but I am on day 3 of a hangover right now. I don't know what's wrong with me. So I'm not going to do that. Let's jump right into it. Let's get loaded anyway, because this is Loaded Box Vids. And we're going to start off with our very first one. It's going to be a quarterback, and it's going to be Cam Newton, currently of the New England Patriots, more famously known for being with the Carolina Panthers all those years. Official predictions for him is that he's either going to stay put in New England, which admittedly I use this one very loosely because I don't necessarily think it's going to happen. And then I also have him potentially going to Chicago, or the most likely scenario in my mind would be reuniting in Washington with Ron Rivera, because Ron Rivera has never wanted to write off Cam, and Cam and him have a very good rapport. Washington needs a quarterback. I mean, it kind of makes sense. What do you think is going to happen with Cam this offseason?
I think honestly the two more likely destinations are what you said. Either he somehow stays in New England, or he goes and has a reunion tour with Ron Rivera in Washington. The Bears are interesting. I think you could throw a couple other teams out there. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to say, for the sake of it, basically the other teams that you didn't say, or I'm not saying, are just the ones that might miss out on the Wentz/Watson/draft for the quarterback. There's a couple of teams that obviously were active in getting Matthew Stafford, and there's a bunch of teams that would like to at least kick tires on Watson. So I feel like Cam could be a low-risk upgrade, like a 1-year signing for teams. Like even maybe Denver, if they don't like Drew Lock, if they want to slightly upgrade. I don't know. I'm just saying, like they could – the guy they could bring in to at least challenge him. I'm not sure what his market will hold. He didn't really have the best year. Granted, New England has no weapons.
Yeah, it was definitely a tough year for him because New England, like you said, does not have any weapons for the guy. I mean, Julian Edelman barely played this year. It was to the point where Jacoby Myers was quite literally Cam's top receiver throughout the majority of the season. And as you and I can both tell everyone, that he's barely a wide receiver 3.
It's not ideal.
Yeah. So I don't know how much you can really fault Cam. I mean, he was playing with the noodle arm out there. He did look really good on the ground again. So that was definitely nice to see. I definitely don't think that Cam's days of playing are over, but I do think that his best days of playing are definitely behind him. You're right. I mean, I can see him going somewhere being kind of second fiddle, or at least a training camp battle kind of guy. I would honestly be surprised if he's starting in week 1 for any team in the NFL this upcoming season. In terms of Dynasty, I would consider him a hold. You're not going to be able to sell him for anything, and I'd be too nervous to buy him unless you can get him quite literally for free. I'm probably not going out of my way to acquire Cam Newton. So the only thing I can say for his Dynasty value is that he's a hold right now.
I would agree. There's not much value there either way. So I would just say, hold him if you got him.
Yeah. And like we mentioned, I mean, he's still good on the ground. If he goes somewhere and he does land a few opportunities, rushing quarterbacks are always phenomenal to have in fantasy football. So I definitely wouldn't drop him, but I couldn't do anything besides say he's a hold. And for that reason, we're going to move on from Cam Newton because it's just beating a dead horse. I feel like we just have to talk about the same thing over and over again with him, especially over the last couple of years. But we'll move on to our second quarterback of the day, our final quarterback of our free agency frenzy series here. And it's Ryan Fitzpatrick, currently of the Miami Dolphins. He's going to be an interesting one because there is a slight chance that he can retire. But I'm not going to put that in as an official prediction because he seemed highly motivated last year, right before Tua, quote unquote, took the job from him. Miami looked really good under Ryan Fitzpatrick. And even whenever he had to fill in after Tua officially took the starting role, I think Fitzpatrick looked perfectly fine. Official predictions are maybe he stays in Miami and sticks around with Tua. I don't necessarily like that one, but it's definitely a possibility. Or he could be the guy that goes and replaces Cam Newton for a year or two in New England, or he can go over to Denver and give them a halfway legitimate quarterback so their receivers can start growing while they're figuring something out in lieu of using Drew Lock. But I'll let you talk about Ryan Fitzpatrick here. What are your thoughts on him?
I think he's similar to the Cam Newton like archetype in terms of like there really isn't that many teams where either of them would start, and if they're starting, it's because the team literally has no other option. And I'm not slighting them; it's just Fitzpatrick is known to like come in guns a-blazing for a couple games and then just turn into the turnover machine he has been his whole entire career. Granted, this past year, the Dolphins, he was looking pretty good, and the whole quarterback situation with them swapping is weird. He did seem to like it in Miami, though, so I wouldn't be surprised if he stays. And if you're a Tua owner, I could see if someone's selling him for cheap, or he might even be on the free agent market. Or if you're a Tua owner, you might have him. It would be a good handcuff, like a real-life handcuff, because who knows if they're going to go back and forth like they did last year if Tua struggles again. So if he stays, I just don't see him starting. And if he went to New England, I wouldn't really like that because unless New England goes out and gets a big free agent name and drafts well, because they're one of the worst teams of drafting receivers and tight ends. I mean, of late, obviously Gronk and Hernandez are different stories, but they're drafting for offensive talent is not looking great right now. So I think the Dolphins is probably the best spot for him, as weird as that sounds.
Yeah, in terms of fantasy relevancy, Miami would not be the best spot for him. But if we're talking real life value, it probably would be with Miami. I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick can just continue on the mentorship role and everything like that. With that being said, if he does go to New England, I'm in the same boat as you. I would not start him because he doesn't have any options to throw to. That offensive line is not incredible. God only knows what's going to happen there. I would be intrigued to see him go and start in Denver. Like you said, I would be worried that he would go in guns blazing and then fizzle out by game 5 or 6. But you give him that team and Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton and Noah Fant and Melvin Gordon. I mean, I kind of feel like Ryan Fitzpatrick could produce in this offense. So on the odd chance that he does end up here, I'm not going to say that I would go out and buy him because the chances of him ending up in Denver, while I do think it's a likely landing spot, it's not the most likely thing to happen for him. This would be probably the only place that I can think of where he would have legitimate fantasy value. So I'm not going out. I'm not buying Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's in my opinion, you mentioned it was kind of a similar situation with Cam Newton. From a dynasty spin, I would say it's the exact same scenario. He's just a hold, he's way too likely to be potentially starting in 2021 to drop him. But he is also not likely enough to the point where you're going to get enough from a trade for him. So, I mean, any final thoughts on Fitzpatrick? I think we kind of hit the nail on the head there.
Just if you have him, hold him. If you don't have him, if you're looking to trade for Ryan Fitzpatrick, your team's probably not that good anyway. If we're being honest, if that's what you're looking to trade for,
yeah, you're probably well screwed in this whole thing we call dynasty football if you're purposely going out and getting Ryan Fitzpatrick. But moving on, we actually do have two pretty relevant running backs, and they're honestly both a little difficult to discuss because this time 2 years ago, they were both on top of the world, and now they're seemingly in the basement. I mean, the one of them kind of looks a little bit better now after the whole Super Bowl thing. But we'll start off with the other guy first, and that's going to be Todd Gurley, currently with the Atlanta Falcons, but he was on a 1-year deal. He's going to be a free agent. And he kind of looked like he was donezo in Atlanta.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
why I'm shaking my head. I
dude,
think wherever he signs, it's not going to be as a lead back at this
no,
point.
he fell off hard. I mean, he was phenomenal with the Rams. Even his last few games with the Rams, when people were starting to get worried about the injuries and everything like that, he still played well with them. I don't know if it was an Atlanta thing. I don't know if his game just ridiculously halted. I don't know what's going on with him, but the official predictions are he's out of Atlanta. They're not going to bring him back after the shit show that he produced for them. I could see him banished to the Houston Texans if he just wants any chance of having playing time. I could see him going to Washington because they do need the depth, and Gurley has a decent track record in the past. So, you know, like I said, you can't necessarily completely write him off this year in Atlanta, but it definitely does leave a sour taste.
Yeah, no.
And then I also think it's possible that he ends up in the Jacksonville Jaguars. I do think James Robinson's still going to be the starter there. I don't think Todd Gurley would really take away a lot from him, but he could kind of go in, and this would be the same scenario in Washington too. He could kind of become what Adrian Peterson was to DeAndre Swift this year.
I was actually going to say that something similar. Like I was thinking when you're like listing teams, I was even going to say, not bias aside, but like even the Eagles could sign him because a team that has the young star running back would look to add a guy like Gurley, who's not going to cost that much because the injury concerns. He's older, and like you said, he still has enough in the tank to provide for what they're going to pay him. And one of those teams you just named are the Eagles, or I'm sure you could even argue maybe the Ravens would do it. I mean, granted, they just got rid of Mark Ingram, but my point is there's a handful of teams that would love to sign Todd Gurley. It's just a matter of analyzing it like we're doing for Dynasty/fantasy value. And I think from my opinion, I think it's more or less the same. I think he's not signing as a lead back. He's signing as a 2. Yeah. And it's up to that team to use him accordingly. So I would still hold him if you have him, but I don't know if I would trade for him.
No, I wouldn't trade for him, and I wouldn't trade him away. The only thing that I'm doing with Todd Gurley is, by any chance, if he ends up at a place this offseason where the stigma is going to be that he can go in and start there. Like if he goes to Washington or Jacksonville or Philly, like you said, you know, there's no chance that he starts. He's just the change of pace mentor at that point. And Todd Gurley, although he's not a fantastic player anymore, I'm sure he could be a phenomenal mentor because of how good he was over the first 4 years of his career.
I would love the signing for the Birds. I'm trying to talk that into existence.
Well, exactly. But I think he's going to be like Cam Newton, Ryan Fitzpatrick for me. He's just a dynasty hold because you're not going to get nearly enough for him in a trade. I mean, it's Todd Gurley. If you traded him 2 years ago, you would have got a first round pick. And now I don't even know if you can, I don't even know if you can get a third round pick for Todd Gurley these days. So I would hold him. But like I was saying before, if he ends up going somewhere where there is a potential possibility of him starting, then maybe you start shopping him around because there's at least 1 or 2 guys in every league out there that is still holding their breath on Todd Gurley. It was honestly, I was holding my breath on Todd Gurley until about the midway point last season. And he was an RB1 over the first 6 or 7 weeks last year, just because of the upside that he was producing and finding the end zone and all that. But it's just, you're not buying him right now. Like at this moment in time, I don't even know if I could put him in the top 40 dynasty running backs.
I don't think I would, just because of the age / injury scares / the fact that he's not going to sign as a lead back.
Yeah. And the other thing that stinks, and we haven't really mentioned this in any of our other videos, but I know a lot of people, ourselves included, play in salary cap leagues with their dynasties. And I guarantee you, whoever has Todd Gurley on their team probably has him for way too much money. And if that's you, maybe you do have to drop Todd Gurley. Use your free drop period this off season where you don't get any cap penalties or something like that. But that's the only scenario where I think I'm dropping him. I think aside from that, he's a hold for me.
I agree.
But we'll go ahead and move on to Leonard Fournette. As you guys can tell, this video is going to be much shorter today because there's a lot less big names, a lot less to discuss. Exactly. And I'm excited for our next video series that we're gonna do. I have no idea what we're gonna do. We'll have to discuss that after this video, but it'll be cool bringing in some new stuff. But we'll move on to the second and final running back of the day and the final running back of this free agency frenzy series, and that's gonna be Leonard Fournette, Super Bowl champion Lenny.
Yep. I saw that tweet. Super Bowl Lenny now.
Yep, he went from playoff Lenny to Super Bowl Lenny. I think that's so corny, dude. He like gave himself nicknames. Like nobody in their right mind was calling this guy playoff Lenny before he started tweeting about it. Like
it is kind of corny. You're right.
He's such a nerd.
But the man did have a great season, all things considered, for being cut on going from worst to first, quite literally in the same state. May I add, didn't have to go very far.
Yeah, I mean, the story that Fournette has this year is definitely an intriguing one. More than anyone, I was actually really banging the drum on Leonard Fournette before I didn't think that he was going to leave Jacksonville. I thought they were just going to run him into the ground this year, and I was all pumped about that for fantasy purposes because you saw what James Robinson did there. I mean, Leonard Fournette would have done pretty much the exact same thing because Leonard Fournette did do the exact same thing the year before. Yeah. But I digress on that. Leonard Fournette's official prediction landing spots for us is going to be he's going to stay in Tampa Bay on a 1-year cheap kind of contract, or he's going to actually replace Todd Gurley in Atlanta, or he's going to go give Buffalo some much needed help between Zach Moss and Devin Singletary.
I like the Buffalo one, by the way.
I think Buffalo is probably my favorite one here too. Not necessarily for fantasy production. I think no matter where he goes, Fournette isn't going to be a reliable fantasy option. I think he's just a low end RB3, high end RB4, kind of like a depth piece for most teams moving forward. If he ends up in Buffalo, he is going to, I think he becomes the favorite to be the first down back at least. He's not going to take, I mean, he is good in the back. Yeah, he's good out of the backfield, but I don't think he's going to take a lot of receiving work away from Devin Singletary. Zach Moss is still going to be there. I mean, as far as I'm considered, if Fournette goes there, he's going to do a timeshare with Zach Moss, and Devin Singletary is going to see the field on third down. And this would be a nightmare for fantasy because Buffalo's backfield would be essentially rendered useless. But I do think it's definitely a possibility. My favorite thing from a fantasy perspective would be if he did end up in Atlanta. I do think that he could produce a hell of a lot more than Todd Gurley. There is not any real competition in Atlanta. I mean, they were running with Ito Smith and God knows whoever else this year back there.
The Brian Hill guy, right? Is that his name? Right?
Yeah, Brian Hill. I mean, Fournette could go in and, I mean, I don't want to jinx it or anything like that, but he probably could revive his career a little bit and become, I don't want to say a workhorse, but he could sniff 3 down back territory in Atlanta just because of how badly they need someone.
It's plausible. It's not like he's like ancient. He's still relatively young in football terms.
Exactly. So seeing him go there, that would be the only, I think Atlanta might be the only scenario for Leonard Fournette to go out there and get RB2 hype at any point.
You didn't name the obvious choice. Every free agent's going to the Jets, baby.
I mean, we'll see. But
I mean, jokes aside, that actually wouldn't be terrible if I'm being honest. There's
no it wouldn't be. I do think the Jets are going to go out there and
yeah, but wouldn't that be a Jets thing to do? Because we know they're going to overpay certain players. Like they're going to overpay one of the receivers.
It does, but with the new coaching staff that's there, I think we're about to see a whole new era with the Jets. I genuinely believe that.
I'm just talking into existence because if you're someone who wanted to buy Fournette, which now might not be the best time because his value is probably the highest it's been in literally a calendar year since he got cut. But if he goes to one of those 2 locations, Mikey's right, Atlanta would be a good spot. I'm sure there's another team I'm not even thinking of, but Jets would be a good spot. I think he will definitely. I think if the Bucs re-sign Chris Godwin and or Antonio Brown or both, and Gronk says Gronk's coming back. Did he confirm that yet?
Gronk said if he comes back, it's going to be in Tampa.
So
Brady's not going to let him leave. Are you kidding me?
No. So I think if that happens, I think Fournette's out the window. Just because I'm not going to talk about Ron Jones that much, but I think that Rojo, whether you like him or hate him, proved people wrong this year. And they also, they invested a somewhat early pick in Keyshawn Vaughn, who literally got a sprinkle of touches. So if they don't keep Fournette, and that they've already someone sent me something that they've already confirmed, like before. I mean, granted, before they won, that they weren't going to bring Fournette back anyway. Granted, they win, so that changed things. But
yeah,
I think they're more concerned with what you said and what I just talked about, bringing Gronk back, trying to bring Chris Godwin back, and Antonio Brown.
Yeah, and for that reason, I mean, I included Tampa Bay on our official prediction list, but I do think that out of these three teams that we have on there, I do think that it is the least likely. The only reason why I have him on there is because he did help them get to a Super Bowl title, because he actually did play really well in the playoffs. In terms of Fournette, if you can sell him right now, I'd consider it depending on what you get, but I think with him, I'm going to wait until he goes somewhere. I mean, he will lose fantasy value if he goes to Buffalo, and you're going to be stuck with him. But if he does go to a place like Atlanta, you might be able to flip him and sell him for like a low end RB2 cost, or even at that point, just hold on to him for the upside. So I mean, I don't know what I'm doing with Fournette right now. I'm not going out and buying him per se. But
once again, another hold. I think the trend continues so far.
Yeah. Well, we'll move on to a guy that we actually will have a decent amount to talk about, and I guarantee we probably won't be calling him a hold because there definitely is a market out there for him. It's our first receiver on the list today, and it's JuJu Smith-Schuster, TikTok star from the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the official prediction is now there's a possibility he re-signs with Pittsburgh because Big Ben has said that he wants JuJu back next year. And the Steelers, I would imagine, are going to want to bring Ben back for at least one more season. They don't really have a good contingency plan at the quarterback position. So I feel like they would be chalking 2021 up as a loss if they didn't get Big Ben back. So there is a possibility that JuJu stays with Pittsburgh, whether or not it's on the franchise tag or just a 1 year kind of bridge contract. Who knows? I can't imagine he takes a 1 year contract there. It'd either be a long-term or the franchise tag. So we'll see. But the other two likely spots for him is actually going to be with New England and Washington. I don't think JuJu particularly would want to go to New England given the state of their team.
No one wants to go there right now.
But they have a ton of money. It's a clear way into an untouched wide receiver one role. I mean, he would be chalking 2021 up as a loss, but if they can figure out their quarterback situation, I mean, New England could bounce back as soon as 2022. And I think we all have to realize that, especially since Bill Belichick is running the show there. I mean, sure, he doesn't have Tom Brady anymore, but he was just as important as Tom Brady was to the Patriots dynasty. And although we could argue that Brady was the more important piece, and I think he was definitely more important, Bill Belichick was still, a fairly good portion of that. So I can see JuJu going here because they're going to be able to pay him a ton of money, and he would be the unquestioned wide receiver one immediately. And then I can also see him going to the Washington Redskins. They have enough cap to get him. They do need a wide receiver too. I feel like him and Terry McLaurin would complement each other so well because of their play styles. This could definitely be an interesting thing for him. I don't think Washington is going to offer him the most money, but I do think they'll be top 3 in that sweepstakes. And I think it's a very interesting situation for a very young up and coming team. In your personal preference, if you only had to own JuJu for the 2021 season, where are you hoping that he ends up?
I guess Washington, because he excelled when there was another elite receiver. Because yes, Scary Terry is elite. If you don't believe that at this point, get out. Like he was decent. He's not decent. He was great when Antonio Brown was on the same team. And ever since Brown's left, he's had to fill those shoes. And then something to be said in football. It is easier when there's 2 or 3 really good receivers because only 1 or 2 are going to get the coverage, so to speak, and then someone else, like someone's going to be open. That's why the Chiefs' offense, well, besides the other day, has been so deadly because they have Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. So my point is, if he goes to Washington, that's where I want to have him for next year. But the only big asterisk is, literally all 3 of the teams you named all have quarterback issues. Big Ben's a dinosaur. Patriots don't have one. And Washington football team kind of doesn't really. They kind of have one, but like
they're still searching for the answer.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I would say Washington, if they could really, and it pains me to say that, but if they get the quarterback situation figured out, even if they get Cam Newton, like you were saying, and then add JuJu, that would be pretty scary.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Washington's probably my favorite landing spot for JuJu. I don't want to see him stay in Pittsburgh.
No.
He was very inconsistent this year. He hasn't really done a whole hell of a lot in terms of fantasy since Antonio Brown left, like you mentioned.
Very
it's
active on TikTok.
Yeah. But I mean, JuJu has never really excited me. I was fading him pretty hard after his rookie year because I was one of those people that was like, yeah, he's great, but he's not a one. The reason why he showed up as well as he did is because he had Antonio Brown. And I think if we ever want to see that production again, he does have to be the wide receiver 2 somewhere. And I think Washington, but right behind or right with Terry McLaurin, I should say, I think that would be a really good tandem. Like you were saying, if they can figure out their quarterback position, even if it takes a year or two, I think JuJu could have a very intriguing dynasty career there. Now, as it stands right now, with JuJu being a questionable tag on a handful of teams right now, where are you valuing him? Because he's really tough. He's young, he's talented. I've seen people put him just inside their top 20. I've seen people put him just outside their top 20. You have people like me who, honestly, I have a hard time even ranking him in the top 25. But I've always been a JuJu hater. So
yeah,
unbiased.
I'm in between. I'm not at your level, but I'm not in his fandom level. I'm not in his TikTok fan level. I'm like in between. Put it this way, I wouldn't trade a first round pick for him right now.
You would or you wouldn't?
I would not.
Okay. That's interesting.
I mean, maybe if it was like 12 or 11, maybe if I need a receiver that bad, but at that point, I probably could get an option that I would like better with my first round pick.
Yeah, I gotta say, I agree with that. I mean, it's really hard for me to talk about JuJu because I've always had this unnecessary, super weird bias against him, and I'm really trying not to let that show. But it's just, like I could spend an early second round pick on him. I wouldn't send a first round pick to get him.
That's what I was gonna say. I could probably easily enough send a mid to early second. That's fine. But just like a first round pick, let alone anything above like 110 and down, I would reject that offer and tell him the owner to get lost because I would not want to do that. I just don't trust him enough, and him being a free agent, I'm not sure if that helps or hurts this case because there's an uncertainty, especially like you said, you named 3 locations that literally all have quarterback issues. So
I guess for JuJu, what we're saying is if you can sell him for a first round, I think you should do it.
Well, find the local JuJu lover in your league and then try to sell him to that person.
Exactly. If you can sell him for a first round, I would. If you can trade for him for a
RB2,
I would say like, I don't know, like the 3rd overall pick of the 2nd round or lower. If you could trade away, anything like that for JuJu, I probably would. But he's definitely a confusing one because I would not want to pay market value for him, but I would only sell him for what I would perceive as market value. So he's kind of an odd one, but we'll move on. Next guy is Marvin Jones, currently of the Detroit Lions. It's already been announced that him and Kenny G, as we mentioned before in our last video, will not be returning to Detroit. The current projections. What's that?
I said, can you blame him?
No, I can't blame him at all. Jared Goff and literally nothing else going on for them right now. It's going to be a disaster over there in Detroit next year. But hopefully that means it's very good for my DeAndre Swift shares. I guess we'll see what happens. But my top 3 landing spots for him would be Arizona, Tennessee, and the New York Giants. And I'll go in and I'll explain them, but I'm going to let you talk really quick about Marvin Jones. And you mentioned you heard a rumor right before we hopped on the air here.
Yeah, someone said he wanted to potentially follow Stafford. I think that was before and after the trade, like when he knew he was getting traded, which makes sense because they're both older players at this point. They're both over the hump of 30. And Marvin Jones kind of has been, as Mikey has talked to me about this when I first got into fantasy football. He's kind of always been that underrated, like never talked about receiver. Like he's not a league winner per se, but he's definitely one of the better flexes of my like fantasy football career of recent. And he still had some value last year. It's just actually, he had a pretty good year last year, all things considered.
Yeah, he had a good year, and he's only a few years removed from, I think he was like a top 15 or top 16 wide receiver. I mean, granted, he was 28 or 29 when that happened, which is the prime for receiver age. But nonetheless, I mean, Marvin Jones is good. I can't see him going to the Rams. I mean,
No,
I think he could see him going to the Rams, but I don't think the Rams could see him coming.
No, the Rams are only signing him if he wants to sign for like they have so much money allotted now to Stafford and
yeah. If he would tell the Rams, hey, I'll play for you for free, then they would.
Yeah, free or like a 1 year, like a vet minimum or like a $1 million contract. Sure, they'll take
exactly, but that's not going to happen because Marvin Jones does deserve a half decent contract. And while he's definitely not going to get top money, but some of the mid teams in the league in terms of salary cap, I think they're going to get their hands on him, which is why I have Arizona, Tennessee, and the New York Giants here. So with Arizona, I feel like he would be a very good complement to DeAndre Hopkins because they have DeAndre Hopkins. If Larry Fitzgerald retires, I think Marvin Jones would come in and basically replace the Larry Fitzgerald role because Christian Kirk and Andy Isabella, they're just vertical speedsters, and that's not going to work with just DeAndre Hopkins on the field. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins takes up 2 to 3 defenders every single play, and it does open up the vertical option. But having a guy like Larry Fitzgerald the last however many seasons has been a total game changer for Arizona. And I do see a lot of similar plays in Marvin Jones. I don't necessarily think Marvin Jones is as good of a receiver as Larry Fitzgerald was when Larry Fitzgerald was 31 years old.
Most receivers weren't as good as Larry Fitzgerald.
Exactly. But I do think that he would be a very incredible compliment to DeAndre Hopkins on this offense. I think he would develop a really good rapport with Kyler Murray really quickly, and he would not cost Arizona too much money. So I think in terms of fantasy and real life, I think Arizona makes the most sense.
I agree with you. We
said that. Tennessee, I have one here in case they lose Corey Davis. Marvin Jones is a very different play style to AJ Brown. Now, they both can stretch the field if needed, but Marvin Jones is good pretty much anywhere on the field. I think he's a very versatile wide receiver. So I do think that he could come in. He would not have nearly as much fantasy value as he would in Arizona, in my opinion. But he would be an intriguing option. And then there's the Giants, who I honestly would hate this for fantasy because I think he's more of the same. I think he would just kind of blend in with most of the receivers there and would kind of get lost. I could kind of see him having, not that he's going to throw temper tantrums like Golden Tate was, but I could see him having around the same usage that Golden Tate did. So, I mean, my personal preference for Marvin Jones this offseason would be to land in Arizona.
I think Arizona was a good landing spot, and the Titans wouldn't be bad if they lost Corey Davis. I also think it's similar to how I talked about the other quarterbacks in this list today. I think Marvin Jones is going to be that guy, that teams that need receivers, when they look at the list and say, shit, so-and-so signed Robinson, Samuel, like not Landry, JuJu, Galladay. They're going to go, who's the next best guy? Marvin Jones Jr. He's like 5 or 6 down the list. So I feel like that also factors into the fact that a team that might need a receiver that we didn't mention, that's like, because I mean, you could also argue, like, can Marvin Jones take the lateral leap and go play for the Packers if they lose Allen Lazard?
Yeah, I'm sure he could.
And he'd be relevant because Packers fans make sure that, like they only have Devontae Adams, and for receiving options this year, they had Big Bob. God bless his soul. I think he's awesome. And then Devontae Adams, and then who else?
Yeah, I mean, they're a mess.
And a guy like Marvin Jones, I think more importantly, and this factors into the dynasty, I think he wants to win. He played for the Lions for his whole career. He's not going to sign with the Jets.
He used to be on a different team, but it was the Cincinnati Bengals, so not much better.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You're right. So see, I lumped them together. So he's He suffered his whole life, essentially. The last time the Bengals were in the playoffs, AJ McCarron started. So
Well, and that's another reason why I think Arizona just makes so much sense, because they're
they're
going to be an every year playoff contender for the next 5 or 6 years. And while I don't think Marvin Jones is going to be in the league for another 5 or 6 years, he could sign a 2 to 3 year deal there. And I think he would have a very good time playing there. I think I would have a very good time having him on my fantasy rosters. If he ends up in Arizona, honestly, I would group him in as like a mid-range wide receiver 3 with weekly upside.
I would definitely buy him, by the way, if you're someone.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, Marvin Jones, I wouldn't sell him at all because there's no value on him, but that makes him a perfect buy low candidate ahead of this upcoming season because, dude, he is a good receiver. He produces. He's a great depth piece, and you can even slide him in as a wide receiver 3 on your roster most weeks. So I definitely like that call in saying that he's a buy.
That definitely buying. If you need a receiver, if you only got like 3 or 4 in your dynasty roster and you're looking and you're like, shit, I have to add somebody, I don't want to spend a pretty penny, go find the Marvin Jones owner. Like Mikey said, if you throw an okay draft pick at them, they're gonna smash accept, and you might walk like a bandit.
Yeah, and Marvin Jones he's 31 years old. So it's not like he has youth working for him in his dynasty value. So definitely like a dart throw trade offer and see where you get things going. But we'll move on to the third receiver on the list today. And I'm really confused as to what to call him, whether he's a buy, a sell, a hold. And it's Tim Patrick from the Denver Broncos.
I don't know what that is.
He's a really confusing entity because he's not going to stay with Denver, but he played really, really well this year, taking over the Cortland Sutton role because Tim Patrick, he's a big fucking dude.
He's a big guy.
he's massive, and he is going to be, he's proven he's a phenomenal red zone target. He's a physical receiver. He's very good at football. It just took him a little while to break out. Official predictions. There are 4 teams on this list, and I feel bad putting 4 teams instead of just 2 or 3, but honestly, I think you could even extend this list even farther because of how many teams need a legitimate red zone target. Oh yeah, but we have the Jets, the Washington football team, the Baltimore Ravens, and the Detroit Lions. Now, Tim Patrick is not going to be able to pick and choose where he plays, in my opinion. I think he would prefer to go to a place that is going to win, but I think more or less, given how his career arc has been, he probably wants to make some money playing football. And I do think that with what he did in Denver, he could land himself a half decent 2 to 3 year contract somewhere. I think that Baltimore is probably my favorite place. We mentioned it in the last video. They need a massive, big red zone type receiver. And Tim Patrick could be exactly what the doctor ordered there. He could go and play opposite of Terry McLaurin. And while I don't think he would be nearly as good in that offense as JuJu would, Tim Patrick would be a very intriguing option. The New York Jets don't have this big receiving option that they need. I mean,
Jets, dude, I was thinking about that when you said that. That'd be a decent fit.
Yeah, I think he would be a decent fit anywhere. And then Detroit, I mean, I don't want him playing with Jared Goff because I have Tim Patrick on my dynasty roster, and I want to keep Tim Patrick on my dynasty roster because I'm not selling him personally. And actually, that'll be a good segue into the dynasty discussion, is that if you have Tim Patrick, hold him for dear life. I don't think that you're going to be able to buy Tim Patrick because he was reliable in Denver. I had to start him 2 or 3 times because of I had the nightmare season with injuries, as you know, in that league. And every time I started Tim Patrick, that dude scored a touchdown. He never got me more than like 11 or 12 PPR points. But given how far down on my roster he was all reliable for me this season whenever I needed him. And I think anyone who had Tim Patrick this year would probably agree with that statement. So Tim Patrick, I'm going to give you a scenario here, and you got to tell me what you think of him.
All right.
So let's say it's a coin toss, and he's going to end up either with the New York Jets or the Baltimore Ravens. Could you potentially consider him as a legitimate low-end wide receiver 3 going into the season?
Yes. And let me tell you why. Because the Jets, who are they throwing to? The tight end's non-existent. They literally have no running backs on the roster that are relevant. They're all like either rookies or guys that bounced around. So there's who knows what the pass catching game is. And the receivers, they have Denzel Mims, who actually looked good. I'm not going to slight him. but he's young and didn't play. And then they have ageless wonder Crowder season. Like that's that, and he's not.
And Crowder's a small dude.
Yeah, exactly. And he's also injury prone. Like he missed his time. If you're a Crowder, if you've had any shares of Crowder, and then you flip it to Baltimore, it's just the Mark Andrews show. That's the only end zone target there. So I think if Tim Patrick went there, he would immediately slide in and actually help the Ravens, because they would actually have, as the quote a big ass dude to throw to in the end zone, as well as Mark Andrews. So I think either way it's a win-win if for those two situations. And quarterback play is something that's important for receivers. Lamar Jackson is not the best thrower, we all know that, but he's not the worst, and he does find targets in the end zone. I mean, he's found Mark Andrews more often than not, as we all know, the past 2 seasons. And the Jets, they are probably going to draft a more polarizing prospect at second overall, or they keep Sam Darnold, who I also have been on the air saying, or the show saying, that I don't hate him. So either way, I don't hate the quarterback play. And I like Drew Lock, but Tim Patrick's going to a better situation, respectively, from quarterback play. So
yeah. And I gotta say the big reason why I don't think he's going to stay with Denver, they have so many options, and
Sutton's coming back. So
exactly, him and Cortland Sutton are very similar receivers. They don't need 2 of those guys out there at the same time. So for any of you wondering why we said he wouldn't end up in Denver, that's the reason why. It just doesn't really make any sense. But I do think he's going to go out there. He's going to get himself paid. I agree. I think he can definitely be considered a wide receiver 3, depending on where he lands. Even after he gets signed, I'm not selling him, because the hype is not going to be nearly big enough on Tim Patrick to capitalize on him. I think he is, since I have him, I'm holding him. And now if somebody comes at me and is like, hey man, I'll give you a mid-second round pick for Tim Patrick right now, I'd be crazy not to accept that, because
that deal.
I mean, I would be dumb not to, but no one's going to offer you that. No. And that's the reason why we're going to say he's a hold. He's got a lot of upside moving forward. And speaking of moving forward, we'll move on to the next receiver, and it's going to be an old veteran player who has been historically amazing in the league, but has definitely fallen off since. It's oh my goodness, AJ Green. I tried to combine him and AJ Brown, but AJ Green of the Cincinnati Bengals. So I'm going to keep it short with him, if you don't mind, because I don't think he has a ton of dynasty value left. You're not going to sell him for anything. You're not going to buy him for anything.
I want no shares of him. So
I wouldn't drop him unless you have him for like super expensive in a salary league. But the official predictions for him is Pittsburgh, Houston, the Giants, and Denver. And there is a very similar pattern in all of this, and that he's going to go somewhere and he is going to mentor a very young group of receivers. And I think that's all it's going to be for AJ Green. He's going to produce moderate numbers, but it's not going to be anything acceptable for fantasy production. It's honestly, I wouldn't drop him, because it's just so hard to say that I'm going to go out and drop AJ Green. But if you have a shallow roster, I wouldn't necessarily shy away from dropping him if he's one of your only options to drop, because I genuinely think he's just going to go somewhere and take on like a mentorship kind of role.
I agree. I don't think anyone's going to trade for him at this point. Literally be lucky to get a 5th round rookie pick for him. And if someone offers you that, I'd probably accept it. So
yeah, it's not too exciting for him, especially with how many targets he received from Joe Burrow, how many catchable targets he received from Joe Burrow, and AJ Green just really didn't do anything with it. So we kept that one nice and short. It's a shame to see it come to such an abrupt end with AJ Green, but I guess we kind of should have expected it with how many injuries he saw throughout his entire career.
And be stuck on the Bengals for all those years.
Well, he'll definitely go down as one of the best, if not the best receiver in Bengals history to date, but it's over for him. So let's cut ties with him in Dynasty. If you have to drop him, that's fine. I personally just have a hard time actually pulling the trigger on that. But like I said, if you have a shallow roster, I think it's time.
I think if you have to do it, you have to do it. It's one of those things where, in the 10% chance that he like rejuvenates and has relevancy, Like you don't like people aren't going to be like you're an idiot. Like they might make fun of you, but like you dropped a guy who's been injury prone for like ever now and is old.
Well, since we talked about him, we got one more receiver to go over, and it's another Cincinnati Bengal. And Cincinnati is losing receivers this year like it's no one's business, which is why I personally think they're going to draft Jamar Chase for Joe Burrow. But I digress on that one. The next guy we're going to talk about is John Ross. And
the infamous speedster.
he is 1,000% out of Cincinnati. I mean, they scratched him pretty much the entire year. They wanted almost nothing to do with him. I'm pretty sure at one point he was demanding trades and they just wouldn't even talk to the guy. So he's going to hit free agency. Now, there's a slight chance that he ends up in a good spot, but I guess we'll see what happens. The official predictions are the Houston Texans, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Kansas City Chiefs. And I don't think the Chiefs are a super likely landing spot. The only reason why I'm saying that is because he fits their offense. They love their speedsters, and he is one of the fastest people in the entire league. You got to wonder what would happen if they lined him up opposite of Tyreek Hill. Would that even be something that teams could stop? Like, I don't know.
With PI, they could stop it, but no, not.
I do think the Chiefs are going to go out and they're going to get themselves more of a physical type of receiver this year. I could honestly see them drafting one at pick 31 overall in the NFL draft. But you never know. I had to throw them on here just because he would fit their offense pretty well. But I do think Houston and the Chargers are going to be more likely, with Houston probably being the prime landing spot. John Ross is not going to have a big market on free agency. Houston is not going to win many of their bids because no one wants to play for Houston, especially with how they're dealing with the whole Deshaun Watson thing. They're losing JJ Watt. They're going to lose Will Fuller to free agency this year. And because they're losing Will Fuller, I think John Ross could come in and replace the vertical threat that Will Fuller is. I'm not excited about it. I'm not buying him. You can't get anything for John Ross if you sell him. The only thing that I would say for John Ross is that if you have a deep roster and he's out there on the waiver wire, I would pick him up just in case. Because he was a first round pick in real life.
Yeah, but he's only had the 3 games, the 2 seasons ago, whatever it was, that he like blew up, and that's really been it. So
yeah.
Granted, he did play for the Bengals, and before there was a little dark hiccup in their history. And I agree with you. I don't think his markets can be that big. I think it's like what you said. It's going to be teams that like no one wants to play for, like the Texans or the Patriots. That sounds weird saying that, but like teams like that. Because John Ross is going to be lucky to sniff $1 million for a contract. Like he's going to get like literally a league minimum, like a tryout. Maybe.
Yeah, it's tough because there were so many high expectations from him after he shattered the 40-yard dash in the combine. But looking back at it now, I mean, why did we get so excited? He's just fast. Like he's not Tyreek Hill or anything like that. He's just a fast dude.
And being fast does not mean you're always going to be good in the NFL. That's time and time again has popped up, and there's been tons of players who have not delivered because they can run from point A to point B. They have zoomies, but they can't do anything else.
Yeah. So I just wanted to include him on here. I think he is, at the very most, just a deep waiver wire kind of ad.
I agree.
You can't count him as a buy. You can't count him as a sell. You can't even hold it. You can't even use him as a hold because I don't know how many leagues he's still rostered in. So if you have a deep roster, I could maybe put a speculative ad on him, but that's really it. And that's going to do it for the receivers here today. We have 3 more players left for you guys. All 3 of them are tight ends. The first one we're going to talk about, not much to talk about at all. And it's going to be Jared Cook coming out of the New Orleans Saints. They've already announced that he's not coming back. Dude is definitely older. My personal prediction is that he's going to retire.
I think he's going to retire too. I think some weird team might swoop in and sign him, kind of like the Seahawks did with Greg Olsen when we thought Greg Olsen was going to be done. And then they randomly signed him when they already had like 8 tight ends on the roster. And never count the Bears out. They have a hard-on for having 12 tight ends on the roster. So maybe the Bears, but no, all jokes aside, I think he's retiring as well.
Yeah, I think I would hold him on your roster until he does retire. For some reason, even up until this past season, there was some hype around Jared Cook and being a top 12, top 15 tight end. And I mean, in years past, he was reliable for that. I don't understand why he was rated in people's top 10s and top 12s going into the 2020 season. And especially in dynasty leagues. I mean, even if he doesn't retire, I'm not including him in the top 25. So
old. Very
yeah,
old.
just he's going to retire, and that's all I can really say about it, unless you have anything else to include.
No, Jared Cook, enjoy retirement. All right, next.
All right, so these last two guys are both kind of intriguing. First one is a first round pick that originally played for the Cincinnati Bengals, but never really was able to put together a healthy season. It's Tyler Eifert.
Must be a current trend with first round picks that don't pan out in Bengal land.
Yeah, so hopefully that's not the case for Joey Burrow.
No, I'm not saying that.
But yeah, so the official predictions are him is that he's either going to stay in Jacksonville because they do need a tight end. He's reliable enough. There's not a massive tight end market out there this year. So I could see them kind of keeping him on the roster just as some insurance almost. I could see him going to Arizona. We mentioned Dan Arnold in the last video. We talked about Dan Arnold way too long, but if he ends up leaving Arizona, Tyler Eifert, he has always been a very reliable tight end. And he was actually a tight end one in fantasy, I think 1 or 2 seasons, however many years ago.
Yeah. I remember actually. It's one of the first years that you got me into fantasy in a redraft league.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's definitely some value to be had in Tyler Eifert somewhere. And I do think he would fit in well on that Arizona offense. And then I also have him as a prediction to end up on the Carolina Panthers. So I mentioned JuJu Smith last week, and 10 out of 10 times I'd prefer them to land JuJu Smith. But if they want to spend not even half of the money and still get some decent production, I do think Tyler Eifert would be an intriguing option. As I mentioned, if he can stay on the field, if he can stay healthy, he is a half decent tight end.
Yep.
And he's not insanely old either. Like, he's not as ancient as Jared Cook or Greg Olsen or anything like that. Like, yeah, Eifert's not too old, and he's got plenty of gas left in the tank. I think he would fit in perfectly fine in that Carolina offense. He can kind of do it all as the tight end. I mean, he's not my favorite blocker in the world, but he's far from the worst. And I think it would make sense. Now, in terms of dynasty, no matter where he ends up, whether he stays in Jacksonville, goes to Arizona, goes to Carolina, or signs anywhere else, I'm not putting him in my top 20 dynasty tight ends, but I will go as far to say that if I have him on my roster, I definitely want him on my roster going into 2021, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. I think he's decent enough. And like you said, he's proven when he's healthy, he's good enough to roster, especially that position that's always a clusterfuck, if we're being honest.
To put it lightly.
Yeah. I would hold on to him.
Yeah. And you know what? There are probably a handful of leagues where he might be floating around on the waiver wire. And if you only have room to add one more guy, I would probably take a flyer on Tyler Eifert if you need a tight end. And yes, I am telling you to add Tyler Eifert over John Ross as a speculative ad. I genuinely do like Tyler Eifert. Maybe my bias is still here from however many years ago, because I did have him in his tight end one season. I know what he's capable of. I remember it. But I think he's definitely an intriguing option. And while I wouldn't include him in my top 20 dynasty tight ends, he is 1,000% still rosterable in leagues everywhere.
I agree.
And then the last guy we're going to talk about, he is a 28-year-old tight end. There has been on and off hype around him over the last couple of years. He actually looked pretty good in Indianapolis this year with Phillip Rivers until Trey Burton got back into the lineup, and it's Alie-Cox. And official predictions for him is that he's going to either stay in Indianapolis, which it does make sense. He could go to Arizona, as we mentioned. There might be in the running for a tight end, or he could ship himself over to the Jets and kind of become what we always hoped Chris Herndon would be. Alie-Cox is a very good tight end, in my opinion. He's decent enough at blocking. He's very physical. He's a great red zone target. He doesn't really drop a lot of balls. What do you think about Alie-Cox?
I think he's decent enough. I think he's on the same conversation of like the Eifert level, but I think he has the added luxury of not being as injury prone of a track record. I believe he's taller as well. People like that for tight ends. He looked good with Rivers, so I think I don't know. I'm not sure if he'll probably just stay where he was at, but who knows? I mean, there are a bunch of like I said, tight end is a situation, a position that many fantasy owners and real life GMs alike do not have that luxury of having a decent one. So if you have an okay one on your roster or in real life, I always advise keeping it.
Well, that's kind of the main reason though why I think Alie-Cox is going to go somewhere in free agency.
Who's a quarterback there?
Because well, it's that, but they also have Jack Doyle and Trey Burton on the roster, and Alie-Cox, I'm sure he knows that he can go somewhere and probably be the tight end one option on a team, because he has showed up to be good enough to have that role. Now, I wouldn't say he's going to be a top 15, top 20 tight end one in the league, but I do think he could go somewhere like the Jets or like Arizona, or I didn't include them on this list, but even if he ends up in Carolina, he could go to a place like that and take over as the main tight end on the roster, because a lot of teams are hurting for that, for tight ends. Alie-Cox has proven himself good enough this year. And yeah, I mean, I like the guy. That's not the most exciting. A lot of the guys that we went over today weren't exactly the most exciting to go over. I mean, we got to go over Todd Gurley and Fournette, JuJu, Marvin Jones. I even really enjoyed talking about Tim Patrick, but the rest of these guys, it was all kind of just there's question marks around them. They either have fantasy relevance or they used to have fantasy relevance.
Well, you never know.
Exactly. If even one person watching this had any sort of questions on AJ Green, or maybe John Ross is out on your waiver wire, or you just don't know what to do with your old guy and Jared Cook, hopefully we were able to help you guys out a little bit here today.
Always take a shot in the dark. Like I guarantee you, one of these guys that we talked about today, not the other episodes, will have more value than Mikey and I probably underplayed them, and that's the way fantasy football goes. And I'm sure a guy we'd like will also underplay his value. That's the way it goes. Last year, I literally claimed all three of the Jaguar running backs. I texted Mikey. I said, "Well, I can't go wrong." It's like,
yeah,
it worked, you know. So that's you got to take a risk, and it's like it's like this with players that aren't, you know, like the sexy polarizing prospects. Like depth wins.
Depth does win, and if you are in a league that has more than enough roster spots, or if you're in a league like ours where we don't necessarily have a free agency in the off season, but you do have unlimited roster spots. So, you know, if John Ross is a free agent, neither Dylan or I can go out and grab him right now, but we do have a process, and you can essentially acquire as many people as you want in the off season, then just cut it down at the end. So just a couple of guys to look out for here on the list today. And hopefully we hit the nail on the head with JuJu landing in Washington, because that would be definitely very exciting for his fantasy value. But that's going to do it for us here today on our part 3 of fantasy free agency. Thanks for tuning in on Loaded Box Vids. For myself, for Dylan, for Loaded Box itself, make sure you're following us on Twitter. Make sure you're following Loaded Box on Twitter. Feel free to head over to our website, loadedboxpodcast.com. Check out our recent articles, our podcasts. I think some of the guys are doing streams now of the old NCAA college football games, because everyone's getting all excited that it's going to come back next year. It's all in good fun, but we're really excited to stick with you guys this off season. Hopefully we can continue to give you a piece of useful information here or there. And yeah, we'll catch you guys next week.